We will no longer be overlooked. We will no longer accept the status quo. We will no longer be silent. It is time to be heard.
Welcome to our latest Alchemy Theater Be Heard Roundtable discussion with Sara Guerrero, who's a founding member of the Breath of Fire. We are very excited to have her here and to discuss important issues regarding the Latinx community in particular. As a member of the Latinx community, I'm very excited to hear this perspective. It's really near and dear to my heart. The more that I read about the Breath of Fire, it is incredibly important work that you're doing. So I want to speak on behalf of Alchemy and to others that belong to the Latinx community to thank you for all of the hard work that you're doing. Thank you very much, Sara.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Now, we try to start these Be Heard roundtables with a little bit of an emotional mental check-in. So we're going to start off there. As someone who I haven't had the privilege to get to know you in person, but I would just like to ask you, how are you feeling right now in this moment?
I'm feeling okay. I feel like when you think you just have a moment to yourself, and it's important to have those check-ins. Like, it's funny. I just had our board meeting this morning, and we had all these check-ins, and it was, you don't have to feel alone. And
Right.
I just think that's important to remind yourself that you're not alone in this, even though sometimes it feels really lonely. But other than that, it's a Sunday. I'm doing okay.
Good.
Thank you for asking.
Of course, and it's really important to do those check-ins with our Be Heard roundtables because it's really likely that we're going to cover discussions and topics that can get a little bit heavy. So to do that little bit of a check-in before, even if it's not with yourself, to have that open with another individual, just be like, hey, how are you doing? To have that connection, even if we're that far apart.
And Tucker, how are you doing?
Thank you for asking. I'm also doing pretty well. Like you said, it's a Sunday, so I have a little bit of time to myself. My weeks have filled up rather rapidly as of late, so I'm glad to have a little bit to just recoup and try to relax as much as I can, and to meet you and discuss these really important topics. So we're so excited to have you here and discuss a lot of things about the Breath of Fire Latina Theater Ensemble. So to start us off, would you mind telling us what was the intention behind the creation of the Breath of Fire Ensemble?
Well, thank you for asking, Tucker. This is the first time I've engaged with Alchemy Theater, so I've heard about all of you, but this is the first time, so thank you. Breath of Fire came about, I think with most theater companies, because there was something missing, right? Representation, underserved, or voices that are not being staged or being seen. So that's why Breath of Fire came about. I came into theater as an actor. I studied, pursued acting, and really came across a lot of obstacles, right? Systematically, and on so many layers. And I was when I graduated, it was in the 90s from college to study acting. So, but things have definitely have moved forward, but there's so much things that have still just are so stagnant.
Right.
And what was important to me is to have a theater company in a community that I felt a part of. Like, I grew up in Orange County. I grew up in Central Orange County, specifically Santa Ana and Anaheim, and it felt so important to do something here because I had worked with a lot of groups in Los Angeles, from youth to adults through my when I was in college, and it was like, God, I would love to have something like this. I didn't know to run my own theater company, and boy, did I not. It was It's definitely like, what is that? I joke with people when they talk about opening up a nonprofit. I'm like, Ghost of Christmas Past.
Right.
But ultimately, again, a space for someone like myself and others, and that's why Breath of Fire came to be. And I think right now, I mean, as we identify as a 501c3, we are still the only Latina, culturally specific theater organization in Orange County. And
Wow.
probably as identified, like, because we have Latina, I mean, that's a really specific title, but our vision also expands the work that we do as well, and how we see ourselves in our community. But anyway, but that's why Breath of Fire came about to be. And it was conceived back in like 2003, but we didn't get our nonprofit status. I mean, we really didn't get anywhere until 2007.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it took some time. It was like, like this idea, this glimmer, this thought, like, hey, and one big project really put us up on our feet, and we were shouldered and sort of umbrellaed under another organization. And then in 2007 and onward, we got our nonprofit status. We broke ground in a little two office space that turned into a black box off in downtown Santa Ana. And we were neighbors to El Centro Cultural de Mexico for a really long time. And when they left their space, we felt weird to be there. There was
Right.
reasons that they were asked to leave, and it felt weird to be neighbors without them. So we were at a fork in the road as well, and so we went nomadic. And we weren't sure we were going to come back, because a lot of us, especially me personally, I wanted to test the waters elsewhere. But back in 2015, we reemerged, and when we reemerged, we really thought about, how do we come back, and what is it that we want, and why it is, what is our purpose,
Right.
And we've really switched it up. Like, we are not a producing house like we used to be. We used to produce a lot of Latinx works throughout the country, but we have focused on being an incubating space for writers at all skill levels. So that's been our, and through our residency with Grand Central Arts Center, which is part of Cal State Fullerton. So we have a home base in downtown Santa Ana at Grand Central Arts Center.
Right.
I think I gave you more than you needed, than you
No,
asked.
that was
Okay.
gorgeous. That was all really wonderful. And it really goes to highlight the similarities that we have as theater companies, because we ourselves, we don't have an actual physical space, and I don't think we ever have. We are nomadic as well, so we go and rely on the generosity of other theater companies that provide their space for us to tell our stories. So that really touches my heart to see the similarities as well. But when goes with putting together this company that centers the Latinx community specifically, it harkens back to something that Lin-Manuel Miranda said about he wasn't seeing himself represented in the work that was being put out. So he took the call and said that this is something that I need to put out into the world. Would you say that that's accurate with the conception and the spread of Breath of Fire?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's a place. I mean, selfishly, I just wanted a place to do my work.
Right. I personally don't think that that's a
Well,
selfish claim at all.
well, it isn't, but I'll tell you, in that, when creating a space like that, it's not about you. It really isn't. It's about what it is at the work that you're doing, and I think it goes back to what I've always loved about theater is we are storytellers. And what are the best choices and the strongest choices and the most satisfying choices when you're telling your story? I mean, as a director, as a playwright, as an actor, it's like, what are the choices that are really going to just like hit this moment, like how it really needs to be well presented, and I
Right.
think that goes to how we do our work as well, like making those choices to tell story,
Yeah. And
and
that's
representation.
exactly not just the representation, but it's the creative environment that allows that representation to grow organically.
Yeah.
On top of it being a creative space for ourselves to freely express it's to give others the same opportunity, and I find that that's really beautiful. So can we talk about the role of art specifically, and even more specifically than that, theater in the Latinx community? Like, is the landscape of Latinx theater different than that of other theater?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I think it's both. It also really depends on who you speak to. Like, I
Sure.
mean, my situation, my opinion, our experiences will differ. I mean, we're you know, and I think that's what's so great about the diversity within our own communities, that we don't necessarily have the same story, and we don't necessarily have the same like agenda or desires, or you know, but there's so many of us. But I think there are some similar struggles, like the you know, like one of the things that I've you know, we're a volunteer based organization, and we really try to compensate our artists, and we rely on donations, and sometimes we get some really great grants and sometimes we don't, but we always try to be you know, making sure that we're putting forward with our artists, and then providing our programming free to our community. So those are two really key things in when we think about how to support the work. Well, I think for one thing is that it has always existed in cultures, and art is existing. And what I've always come across sitting at tables is people like, well, when I came here, it was this. And I'm like, listen, these things have been going on forever. You just either see it or you don't, or you choose not to see it.
Right.
Right. I mean, I work with a lot of other, I mean, I'm a parent as well. And you know, my son is in Ballet Folklorico. He's in, you know, he's in all other kinds of groups and organizations. And I mean, our art is tied to our culture. It is tied to some traditions sometimes. And that is very much of art making, right? And then to say that this is theater, and what is theater, right? I mean,
Right.
theater is very transformative and malleable, you know? And I feel like there's no one way, but I feel like if we are going to look to the bigger theater companies, we are losing opportunities. And there's so many ways to create theater and honor and hold stories and stage them, that I feel like if we you know, and I know like sometimes I can be a bit of a what is it, a snob when it comes to like theater etiquette. I'm like, shh,
Sure.
like I'm trying to watch the show, you know, or like when people open up wrappers. But can I tell you, in this pandemic, as a director, I miss watching my audience watch the show. Like,
Yeah.
that was one of my favorite things. Now I miss the old man snoring. Now I miss
Right.
the Viaquitas opening up their damn candy. You know,
Exactly.
I miss the questions or the reactions. You know, but anyway, I you know, like there's definitely groups that I connect with in the LA area, and also on a national level with the Latinx communities, right, in theater, and like, you know, staying connected, hearing what's going on, best practices, the steps in our movement, right, are really, it's important to stay connected. Because, and then also, like here in Orange County, we're the only Latina theater company. So it's you know, we also work with organizations that are not necessarily theater aligned, like other culturally specific organizations, to like best practices, or how do you work together, you know, and
Yeah.
partnering and things. And then also just I mean, I think in this pandemic we have worked with so many organizations outside of our county, and I mean, not only just locally, but just we've really grown our reach in this time. So, and we found other groups like us that aren't necessarily geographically like, you know, in proximity.
Right. And that, in a way, is a minor advantage that this quarantine has brought us. It's brought us closer together
Mm-hmm.
in a ways that we hadn't thought, in exchange for that sacrifice of the more interpersonal uh, what's the term? The more interpersonal rapport exchange. Uh,
Networking, camaraderie. Yeah,
exactly.
it's, well, it's funny because I mean, here we are in a year. We went online in March. We were just May 7th, we had launched our pilot touring project called Stage Stories. And it was works that came out of our workshop process. And that was invited to be presented at Claremont Graduate University. And then we were going to tour it to other locations.
Wow.
Yeah, and but the pandemic happened, right? And it was like, no freaking way, and so, but that then translated to an online streaming series that was produced by some of our newer ensemble members, Victoria Yvette Zepeda and Santa Samano. And so they took our thing and then they put it online, and we have like 7 episodes now as a result.
That's incredible.
And so, I mean, I think we grew as an organization because of the pandemic, because we wanted to stay connected. I mean, it was brutal. It was brutal. And
Yeah.
how do we, and we lost some people because Wi-Fi, internet, broadband is not for everybody,
Right.
and people having to work and worry about jobs. We lost some artists because of their work. And, we just wanted to be a place to feel safe. And that's why we ended up going online. And honestly, like, it wasn't my first thought. I was like, well, I guess I'll just shut down and make tortillas and be the bleach wiper for my family and make sure no one lose their Wi-Fi while going to school. And our ensemble members were like, let's move it online. Let's do our programming. Let's do in-house readings. Let's read plays. And we read, I think, our first in-house reading in March.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and we're still online.
Right. And it just goes to show how tenacious the theater community is with regards to keeping their own personal creative fires burning, and it goes both ways too. It's not just burning for ourselves, but we want to share it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that why we were able to move so fast is we're not a giant, we're not a huge organization. We're a small core organization. So we were able to make those changes. But I think we've always have always reached obstacles. We've always had to be resourceful. We've always had to be resilient. So it was like, this is much, we didn't realize how complicated it would eventually become, but it was like, it was a no-brainer in some ways, like, yes, we will figure this out. I mean, constantly problem solving, right? And you don't have the resources, you really go the Rasquache way, and you try to figure out, like, you practice all the things, the problem solving, the innovation, the collaboration, it's so natural, and it's so organic in the way you move forward,
Exactly. And we, as individuals, as creative individuals rather, excuse me, the theatrical community has continued to just overcome obstacle after obstacle just to be able to keep moving forward so you don't grow stagnant.
Yeah.
And it's due to that and our needs to bring in really important issues and stories and voices to light. So what would you say some of those critical issues that Breath of Fire wants to acknowledge and discuss with their artistic discourse?
Well, you know what? All of our work has always been about touching issues, social justice issues, without it being a pamphlet, without it beating you over the head, without trying to offer you answers. I mean, we've always had plays that dealt with immigration, HIV, AIDS, mental illness, broken families, dysfunction. I mean, the breadth of our work has always been topics that are relevant to not just our Latino community, Latinx community, Latina community, but also just, issues that people don't necessarily want to talk about, but using theater in an artful way, and in a way to allow people to come to their own conclusions and have dialogue. So but in this time, there was a lot of pausing and like, hey, what are we doing? Especially what had happened with George Floyd, we paused and we were looking at ourselves like, what are we doing? that's being, I mean, even I had some moments I was like, oh my God, my laundry list, you know, and it was really about a moment just to listen and,
Right.
and then look at our own community and who was missing at our table, you know, our little picnic table. And so and then when Stage Stories came back, it really became about adhering to those voices, holding space, and being aware of land acknowledgement. And our partners became the Black Student Union, a local Black Student Union, Protect Puvunga, and the Brown Bag Theater Company at Irvine, UC Irvine, who we've always had a relationship, but we just sort of reignited our partnership. And then, of course, play protest projects with our COVID monologues. And then just the stories in themselves, like allowing people just to have a space, our Thursday night playwright meetup groups. It was just about having a safe space or creating a space for others who don't have it, you know, and then trying to just, you know, like, you know, be aware of scheduling times. And then we were having people from the East Coast, Midwest, Mountain Time, like trying to like make sure that we could find a happy medium time, you know, to meet. But definitely the conversation about addressing the injustice to Black and Brown communities was very, very, very important. And if it was, and it was really on our producers' shoulders for Stage Stories, who really helped push that forward. And I definitely want to credit them. And it was again like about, you know, I'm the artistic director, but even I don't always have the. I mean, I often don't have the answer. I have to kind of like, oh, there's the answer, you know, or it'll hit me at 3 a.m, and I'm like, why weren't you there at 2 p.m?
Right.
But you know, like listening to other voices, and like in this time, I think with Zoom, and this is something that I tell people as they're doing their readings, I'm like, listening is getting better. Listening is, and it was like, well, rather than saying it, why don't you just practice it? So I had to just kind of, I had to just listen, you know, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to let you make those decisions, because I also have to unpack things that I feel like I've been holding on to. I'm finally like letting go. And it was also very freeing as well. Like there was, I felt really inspired and emboldened by my own ensemble members.
Yeah.
And I even found myself like feeling like I could let go of things that I no longer care. Like it really helps you pick your battles.
Right.
Anything like, and of course, like going back to my own writing, like I just wrote a full-length play and it's getting selected in New Place Festival. So I'm just
That's
like,
fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
really incredible.
But again, to your question, like it feels like it's always sitting with us. It hasn't, and it feels like there's that saying, like it's not a moment, it's a movement. And
Exactly.
we cannot let it go. And it's made me think about how I work with other organizations as well. Like I sit on the Orange County Arts Council as well, and putting us to task about our steps. And I know that like it's just, you know, like, and then I know that a lot of people put out statements, and it was like, you can put out all the statements you want, but if you're not practicing it, it sort of defeats the purpose.
Right.
And I recognize that it's important to say, hey, we're talking about this and being transparent about that. But if you don't have the answers, it's also good to put it out there too. Like, we're trying to figure this out. And every day, like there's something, when we think we have the answer, the next problem, we then have to find another answer, because the same answer doesn't always work.
Right.
So it's ongoing. It is going to be ongoing. And I feel grateful to have had the opportunity to learn in this time. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning, because I've got some habits that I'm like, compliant.
Right. But that I mean that going back to what you had said, that's
Mhm.
the part of the beauty of theater as an art form,
Mhm.
and getting really back to the roots of it's not just about what you do; it's the acting is reacting, right? So it's just placing that mentality in other aspects of our lives that aren't necessarily creative.
And listening, like really listening, like and it may make you pause, like, working from stillness. I remember my mentor used to always say, if you could, you know you can act your way out of a paper bag, but if you're not grounded, it's bullshit. If you're not listening. And I totally, like, yeah, like, it's a simple act, but it is sometimes hard.
Correct. Correct. Now, with the incredible stories that Breath of Fire has helped to bring to light, it's not just for those that are being represented with the Latinx community, right? It is presenting those stories to all. So,
Yes.
what do you believe are some of the best ways of bringing those aspects of Latinx culture and showcasing them to communities that aren't too familiar?
Well, I first think, like, I mean, it's really up to the writer as well, like who their audience is. If your audience is a group of eighth graders, and that's your audience,
Yeah,
you know, Willard Elementary in Santa Ana, if that's your audience, that's your audience. I never want to assume that on any writer. Like, but having that conversation with them, like, who's your audience? Like, who's this writer? And maybe they're the audience, right?
right.
Part of that is that. And then also, like, I know that sometimes people are hesitant to participate or reach out to us because we've got Latina, in our title. And I'm like, if you're curious enough, you'll reach out and ask us. And if that stops you, I don't know. Like, I can't read people's minds, you know?
Exactly.
So, I mean, we definitely have a lot of artists that aren't necessarily Latina, but our leadership is Latina, you
Right.
know? But in regards to how we connect with an audience, I mean, I don't think we're for everybody, but that doesn't mean that we can't. I mean, we have such an array of people who are drawn to us, and for very specific reasons. Like, some people really took to our COVID monologues, and maybe that's all they take away. Some maybe one or two of the stage stories, or maybe the whole series. Maybe they're just there for our writing workshops. And that's all that they, because it's, again, like, people's capacity, and then people's capacity to be on Zoom. Like, I think I need to take a break from directing on Zoom.
Right.
You know what? And I don't think this is going to stop. I think this is going to be a great instrument as we continue to
Absolutely.
do our work. But but again, I think it's really having the conversation with the writer. And sometimes our writers aren't aware of that. But I think it's good to have those conversations. Like, who do you see in your audience? Who do you want to see in your audience? Who is this for? And
Yeah.
exploring that possibilities. But as to how we, like, somebody had asked, like, oh, you need to bring this to LA. This is when we were in person. And I was like, but we're Orange County. Like, and you know what, like, it would feel weird for me to try to push Breath of Fire in Los Angeles. I know enough organizations that are amazing, and we share a lot of artists. Like, oh my God, like, I sometimes feel like Breath of Fire is a cousin to a lot of the Latinx theater companies in Los Angeles. Like, we're part of the Latina Theater Alliance of Los Angeles, the Greater Los Angeles, because Orange County is called the Greater Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
But I again, like, we share a lot of audiences. We integrate a lot of people, and so it just, I don't think we like to limit ourselves, but I think we like to ask questions as to what, get specific, and then
Yeah.
whatever that sort of frames, then that's kind of your target. And that doesn't mean that that is the only. I mean, targets have the the other circles that sort of fall around it. Am I making sense?
That does make sense. You don't want to put yourself too much into a hole that only this amount of people
Yeah,
can get enjoyment or enlightenment
yeah.
from your work.
And being online, I know we've grown our audiences, because we're not. I mean, I mean, there's probably people in Orange County who still don't know who we are. I mean, there's people in Santa Ana who still don't know who we are. And that's part of, like, I mean, that's the double, I mean, the good and the bad with being such a small organization, you know. And we don't have the budget of our larger theater companies, and like we don't have the resources, you know, we don't have the funders. I mean, that's the reality of it.
The reality of working for a nonprofit or a nonprofit theater company at that. There's always the search for funds, grants, producers, you know, just to be able to get those voices heard, because you can write it, but you know, we need the means to make the voices heard on a grander scale.
And that's a conversation that I think it really has to be had, is looking at the larger, and those are things that are happening now, like at a federal and a state level, like you know, when we think about the NEA, like for them to rethink the way in which they give their, you know, the giving practices in line with what is socially going on right now, like our social justice issues and concerns with dealing with systematic racism in our institutes, you know, and not just them, but like bigger funders, like, and making sure that there is representation at those levels as well.
Right. So it's all about the representation and making sure that those stories from those writers that are reflective of their story, that might resonate for others. But as you said, not all the stories are created equal, and they're not all going to be representative of everybody that will even take something out of it.
Yes, and I mean, going back to that, writers aren't necessarily always writing biographically. Like
Right.
there are writers who are drawn to an event or something that they, you know, that just came out of nowhere, right? And I love that, because again, we don't always have to write about trauma. We can have a casual story about friends who just happen to be Latinx, you know, without it like being about like the stories that everybody's, you know, that seems to categorize a large group of stereotypes. And those roles, actually, those people exist, but there is so much more to our community, and even within our community, there's so much diversity.
Exactly. And it's really important that a large spectrum of audiences see those things.
Yeah.
And there are a large amount of white cis allies that are out there that support diverse theater companies such as Breath of Fire, I'm sure. So what would you say your message for those white cis allies working in theater that want to help bring that equity and justice to the stage, but they don't know where to start exactly?
They need to do their research.
We all know the type, you know.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold their hand. I'll be honest. I have done enough engagement work for large theater organizations to profit and get those big funds to do their projects. They need to do their research. If they're welcome to reach out to us and pay us properly if they want us to be a partner in some capacity. But as you can see, I mean, there's definitely some organizations that have reached out to us, and we're doing things as we move forward. But they need to do their research. They need to do their work, and it's going to be long term. This isn't short term. And I mean, I definitely love hearing about how you know, boards and leadership is changing at some major organizations, but it's still, you know, like there's still so much to be done. You know, and I think knowing that a lot of times these people of power, who generally are white, that have more funding, like often decide how they really decide conversations. And again, representation is very, very key, and new voices is very, very key. And it's sometimes like maybe your system is broken. Maybe it's not broken for you, but it's definitely broken for others. I mean, Breath of Fire would not have come to be if there wasn't a broken system. Breath of Fire would not, if there was more opportunities, I could have just done my work as an actor. You know,
Right.
who's to say whether or not I would have been successful? I don't know, right? That would have been, but this came to be because of the problems. And I, as somebody who was part of that, you thought I could make a difference. And so I'm trying to, but there are still so many obstacles. And I see other organizations who are forming and also finding the same problems. And like I was joking earlier, like Ghost of Christmas Past. I mean, there are reasons why these groups exist. And one of the things that I've recognized is, so I'm often asked to write about the histories of Orange County and commissioned, specifically to write about plays. And what always comes up is how things, like especially when it comes to events, like historical events that cause trauma to the Latinx community, and there was some sort of like search, like social justice, like want or need or desire, or something was missing, and it's because of systematic racism.
Right.
And then journalistically, a lot of these stories were repressed because the powers that be had the power of the media. We historically we had one of the worst union strikes in the country historically,
Right.
and no one knows about it because our the powers that be really repressed it. Really, I mean, the things
Unless
that
you
came out,
happen to have lived through it at the time.
lived through it, and then also find the documentation that sort of like is sort of hidden in the nooks and the crannies and stuff. But anyway, like, so my point is, like, there are so many stories, and as somebody who's had to do her research as a writer and learn about my community, there's so many things that have been hidden, and then people follow that, people accept that, and that's part of the colonialism, and part of the assimilation, and I've been a part of that process, generationally, and so it's also like trying to
pick it apart.
and like and then also just give yourself an opportunity to just like confront yourself, and like, how do you move forward, and then forgive yourself,
Yeah.
and then maybe you have to go make amends with others.
Right. And on a personal note too,
Uh-huh.
because I am part of the Latinx community, but I am white passing. There is so many experiences where on both sides of the
Colorism.
spectrum, as a creative, right? I personally feel that I'm not quite white enough for what white theater wants me to be, and not quite Latinx enough for the Latinx community, and there's that sort of identity crisis that goes on there, because I recognize that I personally have the privilege of appearing to be white and all of the things that brings me as an individual, but I also know how important it is to respect my culture as a Latinx man, so it's really invaluable, the need to have those stories told, and told a lot more mainstream, and to have these stories told and advertised freely, as so
Right.
like why Breath of Fire needs to be its own individual entity instead of just having existed, you know. So on the other side of the coin, there is a lot of research that has to be done for those white cis allies that want to help and do their due diligence in making sure that justice and equity in the theater community is growing and not just inclining on a trend, But on the other end of the spectrum, as a director with Latinx heritage, what encouragements would you make for other Latinx creatives, whether they're actors or directors or other creatives, that want to get their story told and their voices heard?
Do it. If you want it, do it. Make noise. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, there are more resources out there, right? Because of imagine this pandemic, and if we didn't have the internet, right? We have the internet. Like, I remember being an actor and having to snail mail my 300 resumes and headshots, and using my Thomas guide to look for the locations of my different auditions for the day, having a pager, having changed for the phone to go check the voicemail messages on my pager. So in this time, like, and maybe it's not necessarily the same cultural organization or wherever's your home. Like, you may have to create your home, you may have to, but there are so many groups to now connect with. I think it's just reaching out and learning about, going to their websites, knowing the information. Like, if you go to do a little research and you learn about an organization and you're like, I don't know if that's my fit, but there's a curiosity there, reach out to them. Like, there's some writers who in the past have reached out and like, oh, we want Breath of Fire to produce our work. And I'm like, have you even read our website? Do you know what we're doing right now? Or we're an incubating space. Do you want an in-house reading? Or like people who like when we have our playwright meetup group, like, oh, I'm not a Latina. I'm like, do you want to write? Yeah, well then just come and you fill it out. But we do have our guidelines. We are very clear about how we hold our circles. And again, we may not be for everybody, and that's okay. Like, there are so many other groups out there. I think it's doing your research. If you really want this, you got to work it. Like, and then read your plays. If you don't know who's the writer, I mean, there's so many people who've compiled lists in this time about playwrights of color, directors of color, producers of color, and, go to, get to, was it like, or like certain pages, learn, it's work. It is work. It is work. But I think anything you love and want, there's always work. Even in my time, there are things that I still have to do to get to do the work that I want to do. I never stop learning, and that's, and now it's, like this pandemic has allowed me a little space and the luxury to sort of, deconstruct or go through all of my feelings and my steps and like, even just looking at how I teach and how I direct and how I write and how my protagonists, because even that affected me,
Sure.
But anyway, but in regards to like what people should do, I think if you really want this, like I said, you have to do the work. You have to do the work. And you know what? It never hurts to ask. What do you got to lose? Like, when people are like, God, I'm like, just ask.
Yeah.
I mean, there are students or there are people that just reach out to me, and if I have the time, I'm happy to make it. If I don't, I'll let you know, and maybe we can try another time. But like, if you don't ask, you won't know.
Yeah.
And you'll miss an opportunity.
Exactly.
Oh, and no FOMO. If you missed out, take care. Self-care.
Self-care is critically important in this time. I
And
completely agree.
read. If you get asked to do a reading, and that's a great practice in this time. Is get to know your playwrights, get to know your literary people. If you want your play, you're probably going to have to produce it. Be a producer. Step into the shoes of others, so that you can appreciate what everyone else does. I think in this time we've all had to become a little bit of everything because of, and are isolated in our spaces. Not that you have to do everything, but I just think it's really good to be appreciative and respectful of other fields in the theater. When I was in high school, we all had to do crew. Like, we had to build stuff, paint stuff, as much as we hated it. And even in college, I had crewing hours that I had to do. I mean, I thankfully got stuck into costuming, but like, I think it's important to just kind of know, and even like the executive side, the development, the board. I mean, it takes a freaking village to make the work that we do happen.
Exactly.
And you are not above anyone,
We're all the same rank. It doesn't matter where you are or what you do. Creating this work side by side.
Company. That depends on the theater company and how they treat
That's true. With regards to a lot of the the theater that is created during COVID.
Mhm.
It's an incredible amount that's still being done on the forefront of, gosh, the internet theater community through Zoom and all these other things, especially with your COVID monologues as well. When you're talking about serious things like racism or even things like COVID in your virtual theater, how do you create something that is honest but doesn't veer into the trauma porn? You know, especially when you're honoring those who have passed.
Well, all of our writers, we had, so for the first round, we had about 24 submissions, and it was, we gave instructions, like our literary director, Diana Bourbano, to her credit, really headed that project. And who's also an amazing writer and actor in her own right. And so she really set out the parameters, and it wasn't, and we really were clear about it was honoring. It was an honoring. And in my eyes, it's a living altar. You know, in Santa Ana, we have Day of the Dead has really grown in our community, and it's a very personal and a very like communal event. And we didn't have it in 2020. And then to know that we were, a little before, or we released our COVID monologues, we were just nearing the 500,000 mark. And so it was again about honoring and not, and some people, like, I know that they were so angry. Like, I'm angry. That totally could have been prevented. Under better leadership, stronger leadership, consistent, stronger leadership that didn't put money before people, could have been prevented. And so it was really about a way for people to mourn, because you can't, mourning somebody on Zoom is so hard. Like, I've gone to Zoom funerals, and you want to be there for your loved ones. You really, really do. And it's difficult, and then to know that
Right.
some of them had to die alone. But anyway, our writers were really given the permission to write however they wanted. But again, it was about honoring that person. And then how did that come about? And you didn't necessarily have to know the person. Like, maybe there was an obituary that you were drawn to. Then we asked, like, make sure you do your research. You can, reach out to the family if you feel so inclined to write about them. And so a lot of people did their work, and then we helped them sort of move it into a Zoom however you. And then that was also another thing, is like, how do you feel about this? How do you want this? And we had some people who told their story directly from themselves, like about the person that they lost, and others cast actors, others put in stills and music. It was they're all very different, and that's what I like about them, because they kind of represent an individual, as opposed to being a number. Here they were being honored as a person.
Right.
And so we had our second round, which was in March 1st. And so we have, I don't even know how many were submitted, I'll be honest, but I think it's a nice chunk.
Right.
And we'll be releasing that next, not all of them, because we can't fit all of them, but we'll be highlighting through the Musical Center come May. And then we're going to do another round, another call for COVID monologues. And so it's really, again, like, as our literary director, when she receives the submissions, definitely goes through them and offers some, like, gives questions to the playwright about, like, clarity about this or that. But really, it's their body of work on how they want to honor them. So in regards to the trauma, and that's a conversation we continue to have with our writers about, like, like, if you need to write about something to help deal with it, like, we just wrapped up our Rio de Mi Vida workshops with Angela Estella and Elvia Rubacabla, which was amazing. And it was writing about self and self-care, and the way they set up the check-ins, the setting up, like the guidelines, like, and even just a little warm-up. That was amazing. Those are things that we try to be mindful of when going into the space. And then just checking in with our writers. But as in regards to trauma, like, a lot of the work that sometimes we're asked to write is about trauma, or what we are asked to do is stage. And it's like, we're also casual people too. Like I
Right.
just one of our ensemble members directed something for the Trans Fest for Madison, Wisconsin, and it was this delightful piece. Just so happened to have some Latinx trans characters that were having brunch together, and it felt so casual. It was so nice to watch something so casual that just so happened to be Latinx,
I love that.
and it made me feel like I miss hanging out with my friends and
Right.
having brunch, like we don't always have to stage our trauma. And I feel like that's part of the problem when we think about the work that gets selected at white people regional theater companies. It's a lot about us putting our trauma on the stage. Like, oh, we've suffered. And it's like, yes, we have, but there's so much more to us. And not to say that
Right.
those stories can't be told, but we're also people too. And we fart, burp, eat, laugh at jokes, even are internally racist as well.
Sure. These are all important things to address to
Right.
present us as human beings.
Right.
And it's really truly incredible the work that Breath of Fire Latina Ensemble has created and will continue to create. And if you wouldn't mind, we mind asking you, providing us some links to some of the things that will be coming up with the Musco Center of the Arts. We'd be happy to shine a
Sure.
spotlight on those things. And I'm again, we are so grateful, Sarah, to have you on for this interview. It
Thank
has been
you.
an incredible perspective that you've shared, and we are so glad that you were here to have the time to express it to us. We're really, I want to thank you on behalf of Alchemy for introducing us to this wonderful ensemble and all of the incredible work that you've helped create and write and direct. I want to thank Bailey on our committee for introducing us, and hopefully we will be continuing to interact and help build each other up over these next few months, as live theater will be starting to hopefully make our way back to more physical interactions. And thank you again for joining us for this interview.